I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in to this morning's webinar on maintenance and tuning strategies. And with that, I give you Kathy, Jeremy, and Richard.
Hey, thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Right.
I'm Kathy Williams. I have great passion for the maintenance and tuning strategies for your Lawson systems. If you don't have a plan at this time, we're going to talk about it today so that you can possibly get a plan in place.
Yeah.
Today's topics are maintenance, tuning, and performance for your Lawson system. So we're going to do a little discovery, talk a little bit about it, and see if we can't get you on the roadmap for maintenance and tuning of your systems to have a best performance out of your system. So let's talk about maintenance. What do you think? Maintenance is really an important part of your system. Whether you realize it or not, once you implement your Lawson system, you really need to maintain that system, isn't that right?
Yeah.
I think it's really a problem that people don't take note to until there's a problem. I mean, if all of a sudden your systems aren't running right or you're having a problem, you want to prevent that, kind of like maintenance on your car. You want to change your oil so your car engine doesn't blow up. You want to keep your Lawson system maintained and be proactive about it. So schedule a assessment with RPI if you don't have one at this time, and we can help you build out a maintenance plan, a maintenance schedule. But what's really important is that you do that on a regular basis. And some people prefer to look at their systems daily, weekly, monthly, but we really want...
You mean not just when it stops working?
Yeah, it's probably not a good idea. You know, have end users calling you constantly saying the system, I can't log in, I can't run a job, I can't do this or that. We really want to be proactive with that approach for your maintenance. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and you know, kind of a roadmap and how to go about that maintenance program for your system. What kind of systems need maintenance? What kind of systems do you have? If you have Lawson System Foundation, you definitely need a maintenance plan. If you have Landmark is designed, does a lot of that cleanup work for you, but it still needs a bit of maintenance. Your MSCM servers, they need maintenance. Your Smart Office and Mingle as well. I mean, all servers carry a little bit of system logs that can clog up your system, clog up your, you might say, your disk space for your system. So you want to be maintaining those systems on a regular basis. Now we offer with our managed services department for our clients that we take care of their systems. We do this on a monthly basis, and that's what we recommend for everyone. At least once a month to go out, take a look at your systems, clean them up, do what needs to be done. And if you're on a Windows system, reboot those systems at least once a month because you're going to get the best performance from that. Now, if you don't have a maintenance program, you don't have a way to understand when and how to patch your system, you're going to want to do that as well. So, you know, don't wait for a problem. Kind of be proactive and get your users involved in a maintenance program for patching and keeping your versions up to date. Your support people at Infor are going to love you for that. So what kind of things are a maintenance, for LSF? One thing that we really want you to take note of is logs. In your Lotter system directory, you're going to have a lot of logs there. And this kind of little checklist that I have put together for our managed services clients, we always go through the system, check for logs, see if there's any growing logs. We always archive those logs. And there's not only logs in your Lawson system directory, but there's also logs that are spawned up by your web. Your WebSphere can carry a lot of logs there. You want to archive those as well and keep those cleaned up.
Hey, what I like about this checklist is that it means that the maintenance routine is done consistently every time.
Exactly.
Right? So we're talking about once a month, and ideally we have the same system administrator run through those tasks, but the person's not going to be around every single month on the first day or whenever we call it. So anyone can step in here, and we know that the maintenance routine is performed the same way in the same order. It covers all the bases, and we check all the same places.
Absolutely. That's why we have a checklist, and we keep track of all the maintenance we do on our customer systems. So it's really important. One thing that we do during our maintenance checkup on a monthly basis is we check for hung processes. We check for system resources. We always look at the disk space that's available, and we keep track of that every month to make sure that our customer systems aren't growing too rapidly and running out of space, so that we can be proactive in that. We like to look at the jobs. A lot of customers run recurring jobs, and their users run jobs every day, and we like to go through, use the Lawson utilities to delete some of those jobs out. And another thing jobs do for LSF is they create temp files. So every time your users are running a job, you're running a risk of a little file being created. If you're not cleaning up those files, then you're running out of disk space. So it's basically being proactive and cleaning it up.
And I'll just add one thing that was on the checklist was an option for production and for your test environment. Some organizations with active projects, implementing new software or new functionality within your system, your test system becomes just as important almost as your production system. So you certainly don't want your test system to going down in the middle of a huge testing effort.
Good point, Jeremy. I like that. Yeah, we definitely do. For our managed services clients, we always check their test system and their production system. We do one on test 1 week, and then we do the next one on production. We schedule those with our clients. So what does it mean to clean up? Basically removing a lot of the old jobs and the files that may compromise your system. And
It's amazing how many just temporary files get thrown out on the file system on the LSF server, particularly for Windows customers, right?
Absolutely, that is really important. And what happens, if you get too many files out there and your system gets all clogged up? Well, I can tell you from experience, your jobs stop running. Your users are calling 100% of the time, going crazy because all of a sudden they can't add any jobs, or anything can't run because the system is compromised.
Yeah, I just had to remote into a system that had maxed out a hard drive the other day and was 0 bytes on the hard drive. I couldn't even make a security change to a folder to give myself permission to go in and delete files.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Questions?
We have a couple. Are these maintenance updates or tuning updates, are they recommended for cloud customers as well, or is that irrelevant?
Well, when you're in the cloud, it's your hosting provider that would be responsible for,
So this is for
for the uptime of the system.
So
yeah.
Infor is likely performing this for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
these notes here are mostly applicable to on-premise customers who sort of, have taken, sole responsibility for the uptime of their system.
And where, okay, we got a couple more. That was a big one. Where is the WebSphere logs located?
So
Where are the WebSphere?
the WebSphere logs are located where your WebSphere is installed. So normally it's
IBM,
like a
WebSphere,
path,
App Server,
IBM
Profiles.
Yeah. And under your profile, you'll have profiles for WebSphere. There's one for your manager and for your application servers and your nodes. There's logs under each one of those directories.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but it's a good comment because typically you hear it a lot. And that is, you mentioned maintaining the system proactively, but there's a strategy, or what about the strategy? If it's not broken, don't fix it. I ask this because some new patches introduce new issues. I'm not proposing that one never patches, but monthly. We do annual MSP, ESP if they're out, but and do individual CTPs as needed. It reduces the amount of testing other users need to do.
So I think, you know, from my perspective, yeah, certainly you don't want to just be applying every CTP to your application as it comes out. Same with any LSF patch, you know, maybe once or twice a year for LS patching, unless you've got an issue and
Right.
support's directing you to. Another thing that's important though is the Windows patches. I know a lot of organizations will push those automatically out to servers on a monthly basis, and so that's part of what that reboot cycle is also going to require. And then another thing is with being proactive is actually just reviewing the logs and just looking for new error messages that may come up. You know, sometimes some new functionality gets applied, or you've applied a system patch and you know there's a repeated error over and over again. The users may not actually see symptoms, but that constant logging of that error is actually consuming resources and growing your log files. So going out and looking for those erroneous errors that, like I said, may not surface to your end users is an important proactive step that you can be taking as well.
Yeah, and we're not suggesting that you patch your system on a monthly basis, just so that you have a roadmap and a schedule. And basically, they release MSPs and ESPs for a purpose, and that is not on a monthly basis. If you have a need or an issue in your system with your applications, you know, Infor might suggest a CTP to actually fix a problem or a bug in your system. But I don't recommend applying every single patch that's out there, because it might not be applicable to you in your situation.
Cool. Hey, let's keep moving and talk about cleaning up some file system space.
Yeah, so when we do a maintenance check on customer system, one of the first things we always do is we evaluate the system, the performance and the disk space that's available on your system and how it's running, and we kind of track, you know, performance, and if it's capping out on CPU or RAM, that's really important to bring that to a customer's attention. So we always look at the performance and the disk space of your system, and we don't want your system to be compromised by running out of disk space. So we usually check what it is before we start, and then we check it after we're done cleaning up, so that we can see that we actually made improvement for disk space. So what about Landmark? What kind of maintenance is required for Landmark?
So again, you're looking at you're looking at the logs, looking for error messages. The nice thing about Landmark is it does automatically archive the logs when they reach a certain size, and zips them up in the same directory. So at some point you're going to have to clean those old versions or those historical logs out to, you know, to eliminate running out of disk space. But again, checking for hung processes in your WebSphere and grid nodes to make sure that those are running efficiently, and you can actually bring up the Landmark grid and get a high-level picture of where the errors and warnings are and kind of track down those things. And again, checking for system resources. Your Landmark server can get very busy very quickly and consume a lot of memory and a lot of CPU. So you want to make sure you're monitoring that and keeping a close eye on that. And then, of course, cleaning up IPA work units to history. So, you know, IPA processes, you know, depending on your organization's usage, could be hundreds or thousands of work units a day. And that's a lot of data that gets cleaned up or that gets put out into those tables, and they can grow very quickly over the course of a year. And so you want to move that stuff to history. You want to prune the unnecessary data that's only used during the actual execution of the flow, and then get rid of that just to keep your table size down, because it will grow very quickly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And that is one nice thing about Landmark is it's built in the functionality of the environment that you archive your logs. But that doesn't mean you don't have to keep track of your resources as well. Like you said, get rid of the archives and those zip files if you need to, because they do grow. Another thing that we'd like to talk about is a tuning. How can you improve performance on your systems? Every system has a way to improve the performance of the system and how it's running on a regular basis, and we like to be proactive in that and make sure that we tune or configure a system for a client the best we can. And it basically depends on your applications and what kind of systems you're running, right? So what we do is we look at the different configurations, the different ways the system could be configured, and then we do what's recommended for best practices, and a lot of things that you can do will improve your performance, right? So on your LSF system, a lot of your configuration files actually help with performance. And out of the box, your configuration parameters are not best for everyone. So depending on how many users you have, how much you use that system, you want to make sure that you change those files based on your needs. And there are recommendations out there, and really a lot of that really depends on the use, right? And how many users are using the system. So. So in your Lawson system, there are different configuration files, there's different property files. These can really enhance performance for your system. So recommend looking at those files, seeing if any of them have ever been changed. Now I know with using Mingle and the new version 10 systems, a lot of people are asking about timeouts. You know, my user went to the bathroom and came back and the system timed out. There's a lot of considerations that we can do, and we can make changes to the system in the property files, the configuration files that will help with that issue. Just something to be aware of, and understand that it is possible to make changes that will help please your end users, and then that helps everybody along the way, right? One of the things that really are important, I think, in the newer versions that Infor's put a lot of development work into is work inside of WebSphere. For performance purposes, a lot of people are taking advantage of this, and I know at RPI we are creating clusters on our servers that we implement for customers, because it really does enhance performance. And LSF users, a lot of times they're using a lot of resources from WebSphere with the web, and especially heavy users for MS add-ins, that takes a lot of resources from your system. Now once you cluster that WebSphere, you're going to get improved performance, because you can actually split it out to where add-ins uses one application server if you wanted them to. But yeah, having a cluster can really enhance performance for your system. So that's something to take into consideration for sure. Now clustering is also available for other systems. So you want to make sure that you look at the different options available before you make a decision if you're implementing a new system. Or if you already have it up and running, you can always add and enhance your system and your performance by tuning WebSphere and changing it to a clustered environment.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that clustering isn't entirely as straightforward as it might seem, right? It's more than just going into WebSphere console and adding a new app server.
Oh, absolutely. So one thing that a lot of people don't understand is once you cluster your environment, that you need to do some configurations inside WebSphere and inside your Lawson system to take advantage of those clusters, those application servers, because there's more than one now. So a lot of customers are saying, oh, I ran an iOS cache refresh and nothing happened. Well, you may be logged in on an application server, that iOS cache refresh hit another application server, but you never configured your system to use a cluster for iOS cache refresh. It's very important for your end users especially, and for the system to be balanced across that cluster.
Yeah, so if you're seeing symptoms where there's inconsistent results, or one person sees one thing, another person sees another, that could be a symptom of an improper clustering configuration.
Exactly. That's really important to understand that. So what can we do, Jeremy, for Landmark? Can we do something similar there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of tuning that can be done within the grid, and looking at all those JVM nodes that are out there. You know, the sweet spot of a JVM is in that 60 to 70% utilization. So, you know, you don't want to size your nodes too large, and because that causes issues with garbage collection. It has a lot more work to do. And so, you know, there's various ways to monitor that, just looking at the grid itself and just kind of keeping an eye on that. And, you know, especially during peak usage time, but then also just kind of normal operational time too. And this depends, you know, what applications you're running in Landmark, if you're running global HR, contract management, or, you know, looking at the Cloud Suite Financials component as well. And it really depends on, you know, process automation. How many processes do you have running? So a lot can be done there. But kind of the baseline recommendation is about 4 gig for your LPA heap size. But again, just depending on what you've got running in your system, you may actually need to increase that. I've worked with a customer where we had to bump that up to 6 or 8 gig because of a particular process that was consuming a lot of memory and just going through a lot of data and taking a long time to run. And we found that we had to increase that to prevent it basically from running out of memory and crashing. So again, just monitoring those grid nodes and making sure that you know, you're kind of in that sweet spot.
So does Grid have more than one node?
Oh yeah, Grid has several nodes. So Landmark has you know, about 6 or 8 nodes configured right out of the box, and you can scale those out. You can, some of those nodes you can create multiple instances of, and some of them that you can't. There's definitely some recommendations along with that. But then, you know, specifically it's the interactive ones. So your users that are using the web layer, of course, are going through WebSphere. So there's another layer of complexity that you can, again, cluster your WebSphere environment for Landmark. But for rich client users, there's also some interactive nodes within Grid that can be scaled out and increased in size to handle your threshold. I think we see a lot of customers running global HR that are using especially the performance and goals piece of it, when you've got a lot of users in the system the last week before performance evaluations are due, and that can really spike the usage in Landmark.
Absolutely.
And, you know, when we're looking at process automation specifically, of course, we've done webinars on what we can do to improve performance of our flows specifically. But even as we're uploading those flows into the system, you know, and going back into the process definitions and looking at some configurations, you know, looking at the logging level, of course, we've talked about many times in other webinars, you know. So the recommendation is setting that to work unit only. You know, sometimes you can set it to none if it's a tried and true interface, and you're going to see significant performance improvements. The most expensive operation with logging, of course, is the work unit N activity, where it logs every single thing that it does each one of those gets written into the database, and so it just consumes more resources, more transactions against your database. This cancel check frequency is kind of a weird one because the system will actually go out and basically periodically check, each work unit will periodically check, have I been canceled? Because you have the option to cancel work units as they're processing. And so the majority of the time you're not canceling work units. So it makes sense to increase that, and that's a setting again on the process definition. So just so that it's not doing that so frequently. And then capturing your activity start and end times, that's just for logging so that you have that information. It's helpful when you're debugging, but it's just good information to have.
And seeing trends over time, right?
Right.
So you might see the system slowing down little by little, and if you don't measure it, it can be hard to notice.
Right.
Right.
And we talked yesterday, did a webinar on IPA reporting and talked about that specifically, some things that you can do there.
Nice.
There is a knowledge base article that specifically for LPA, and that's this referenced one here, because you can't necessarily, some of the nodes within Landmark, you can kind of, if you're running into issues, especially with LPA, because you could be running processes and you may start running out of memory in that node. And rather than just restarting it, there's some steps that you can take to ensure that your users don't see an interruption.
Nice. So, WebSphere. We talked a little bit about WebSphere already, but is it possible to tune WebSphere? It is absolutely, and there are some configurations that you can change to make WebSphere run and have better performance for your systems. And I've just kind of outlined a little bit of those here because I think it's important to let everyone know that it is possible to get better performance from your systems if you cluster your servers and if you configure it for iOS cache refresh. One thing that a lot of people don't take into consideration and don't know about is that you can change the JVM inside your WebSphere application. There are heap sizes, min and max in there that really do take into consideration for performances. But there's another thing that you might see in your WebSphere logs, and that's thread and heap error messages constantly. You can tune WebSphere for threads. So there's a setting in there for thread pools, and you can always change that. You could ask RPI or Infor for recommendations on that, but it is a good thing to take note of. If you've never looked at that, you might want to consider that if you're getting a lot of errors in your logs for threads. So, and another thing is to use virtual host. I think it's important that a lot of people might just go default out the box, but if you split out your virtual host for your different applications, it really can make a difference in performance as well. So, I don't know. There are considerations. Maybe there are other configurations for WebSphere, but I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize at this time is that you can cluster application servers for WebSphere for different products besides just LSF. I think it used to be just trying it with LSF was working, and now development has found that it also works for other products. So it's now recommended that you cluster your application servers if you're using LSF, Landmark, or MSCM. MSCM can if you have heavy users, you can really take advantage and get better performance from your MSCM server as well. And like I said once before, I think that people that use Microsoft add-ins, this is a big heavy hitter on your application server. So if you're clustered, you can actually set that to use one application server so that it's not clogging up regular traffic for portal users or Mingle users. So that's just one thing to take into consideration with WebSphere.
So this is an interesting one for customers that run Lawson servers on Windows, right?
Absolutely. This is something that you might want to take a note to if you've never been aware of it. Infor has done some development in the background for Windows servers. There's a piece inside your Windows servers where you can actually go into the Windows performance counters, and you can configure it. And I've listed here a lot of the different attributes within the Lawson system that you can take advantage of. But this will help you understand where your resources are going, and actually and be able to split them out. I've got an example of a system here. So this is for web services in Lawson. So if you go in and configure your counters for your Windows system, you can actually look at the monitoring for that, and it'll show you. You could run reports from this. It's actually very cool. So I recommend, if you're on a Windows system, that you look at this and look into it, and RPI can absolutely help you with some of them configurations if you need help in the future with anything like that.
And this allows your Windows Server admins to utilize tools that they may already have in your environment to
Right.
monitor various activities. Using existing tools that they may have to monitor CPU usage and memory usage on their servers. Now these Lawson specific counters can also be monitored directly through those services as well. And so you can be alerted when the number of waiting jobs increases, for example.
Exactly.
Or something like that.
So that's a great tool to use as well. So a lot of customers ask, especially when we do sizing and planning for a new implementation, or they want to know, do we have the right resources for our system? Planning is really important, especially for peak performance reasons. If you're doing enrollment, like everybody's doing benefit enrollments, and you got 5,000 users hitting the system within a short period of time, you want to plan ahead for that so that you don't have system outages or any problems with your performance at that time. So I always advise customers when we're doing planning for new systems to plan your system for peak usage. So if that's going to be during employee enrollments for benefits or something like that, or like you said, when you're doing appraisals and performance information, and a whole bunch of people are hitting the system that normally don't hit it, you want to plan for that ahead of time. So I always say that sizing is important. This is really going to help with system and performance overall, because your disk space, your CPU, and your RAM makes a huge difference, especially on Windows systems. So take note to that and understand that it is important, even though your network people might push back. It's good to have more than is required, actually, because they recommend minimums, but it's not always the best. So where can I see all these resources and all of these things in one place? I love the Infor System Console. I recommend it for customers to install this. It's a small product that is offered by Infor. There's no charge. It's a no charge application that can be implemented to your LSF system, and it can go out with little feelers, and it can capture information from all your other systems as well. So it can grab information from your Landmark system, from your MSCM system, your LBI system. It can really get a lot of data back for you. But what I love about it is that there's a dashboard there that you can get information. You can even get performance information about your system, the CPU, the disk space, the RAM. If you got a hung job or you got a job that needs recovery, you can recover it from this little dashboard. It's just an awesome little tool. It's no charge if you already have a license for LSF. You can install this product. It's a bit to install. I'll be honest with you. It really takes about 30 to 40 hours to get it implemented, but it's so worth it to have all resources in one place and to be able to check your system and make sure everything's running right. I love it because you can send alerts. If your processes are not running, it'll send you an email or a phone alert to text messaging. But it's a really nice little tool to have in your system. So if anyone needs that, wants that, let us know. We can help you with that.
Got a quick question here. Sorry, a couple of questions real quick. What's a good number to use for cancel check frequency instead of the default?
I think I read an article that it's recommended increasing it to 30 seconds. I think the default is like 1 or 2 seconds, so it's constantly checking. So just anything really other than the default.
Other than a second, right?
Yeah.
Is System Console only for LSF? It does not monitor Landmark.
It can. It has to be on LSF, and then optionally it can monitor other servers as well.
So you configure it to go out, and when you're doing the configuration for it, you tell it what systems you have, and it'll go out and it'll get the resources and the information from those systems as well.
Yeah, that's why it's a good bit of work to set up, because you not only do you have to just install the application itself, but you have to then configure all of your systems for it to communicate with.
Yes.
Okay, we'll ask one more and then we'll come back to them later. When you say split out the virtual hosts for different applications, what do you define as different applications?
Anything that's using a web server or a port, a specific port. So in WebSphere, especially on your LSF and your portal systems, you usually have a port that communicates through an application server and a web server. So if you have a virtual host and you want to have that utilize an application, it just depends on how your system's configured. If you have a lot of resources on one system, some people try to consolidate and put multiple applications on one server, and you would take advantage of performance if you split that out into host. Especially if you have like a MSEM application running on your LSF system, you would want to have that split out, not only in virtual hosts, but also in nodes and application servers as well. So it just depends on your configuration and what kind of applications you're running, but you could split it out per application or self-service center if you wanted to do that.
Another example would be what you talked about already with splitting out Microsoft add-ins to a separate WebSphere node. You can then give it a separate virtual host to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that it only uses one application server.
All right, so we've talked about maintaining, cleaning our system. We've talked about speeding up our system. What about patching?
Yeah, we can talk about patching. So when to patch, and basically we already had a question on that.
Is it whenever the business users don't need the system, when they say we're not very busy?
Oh Lord! When I was a sysadmin for client, I always wanted to make sure that I had it on a plan.
Yeah.
And so I did it biannually. I patched the system unless there was a problem, of course. But planning ahead is really important, because if you're going to put in a big MSP or an ESP, you want to get some testers behind that before you release it. So I always like to do it on test system or development system first. and then have a round of testing before you put that on your production system. So it is good to plan ahead and make it once a year, twice a year, whatever works best for you. But don't use the excuse we don't have time for that, because that really can put you back. And if you do have a major problem at some point, you might be forced to do an update if you're too far behind in version. So currently, Infor supports 2 versions back for your environment. Applications, it's a little bit more liberal. They don't force you to be a certain level. They patch based
Applications are patched in source code, right? So it goes all the way back.
It does. It'll if you have to take a patch, even if it's a small CTP, it does patch to current. So it could, and people say, well, I put a patch on and it caused problems. Well, it could have been because that patch was for, fixing many bugs throughout the system, and it may have introduced something that you hadn't patched for.
And what you'll start seeing when we talk about CTPs is, the further you get away from your MSP, when your MSP is installed, those patches that are released are going to have a much bigger impact. So causing a recompile of maybe hundreds of programs.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially on the supply chain side, where we see that most, because there's so much interdependencies. But so if you can establish some sort of maintenance cycle to get an MSP up to date, to just kind of get caught up, then you're going to run into less issues.
That is a good point, Jeremy. I think that's true for sure. So on our maintenance plan, our roadmap, what we like to do is make sure that you always take care of your system, clean up your system, make sure that you do maintain it, and then have a strategy, have a plan, and have a patching plan. Some kind of cyclical updates are advised, and have a schedule and plan that with your end users.
Great. Well, thanks. Are there any more questions we can address in our last couple of minutes we have left? I have a question. Is all that delicious looking food just for the crew, or did you bring any?
No, there's a giant bag back here.
Thanks,
There's a giant bag. There you go.
Appreciate that.
So, questions. When does it make sense to engage a tuning consultant? We've seen that during a major upgrade, it seems to make sense to engage a specialist. Are there other times that this should be considered? I almost feel like giving this question to Bill Getty.
Well, when isn't the right time?
Well, I would say if you're having performance issues, right? If you have lag time, if it feels like it's slowed down, if your customers, your end users are saying, hey, I have issues, it makes sense.
Or if there's some big other change in the environment, like you replaced your database server, upgraded Oracle or something like that, or made some changes to your VM infrastructure. There are just other changes that might have impacted the way the systems run. That's a good time to go through and
it's if you're having system problems or performance problems or having to reboot on more than once a month, there's probably some configurations and some considerations that you can take, and you can always ask us for a system analysis, an assessment. We can do some advising and give you the best advice to keep your performance running best. You don't want to wait until your end users are complaining. It's best to do that. Be proactive about it. If you're noticing problems, let us know. We can help you with that.
Tell us more about the server reboots minimum monthly. We have AIX servers and run on an Oracle database. We know these don't need to be restarted monthly, but should they be restarted every so often as well?
So yeah, the reboot is more for your Windows servers environment. I worked with clients, and actually where I used to work as a customer, ran on an AIX environment with Oracle database, and we maybe rebooted our server once a year.
Maybe.
Was it a planned reboot, or was it just when?
It was
when they-
usually a planned because database upgrade, Oracle upgrade, or AIX upgrade, or
Patches
some,
for your
yeah.
operating system. And
Yeah.
a lot of times they require an
Yeah.
update and a reboot.
So it
and
was usually something a pretty significant effort on the AIX server itself that required a reboot there.
yeah,
So it's more of a Windows thing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's more for your Windows systems.
So I want to thank you guys for taking the time to deliver this great presentation.